So to persuade is to induce, is to induce, is to induce someone to do something through reasoning or argument or through debate. You're trying to shift someone's position. You're trying to move someone from here to there, right? You're trying to move someone from here to there. When you're persuading, you're making someone to do or believe something by giving them a good reason to do it, or by talking to that person and making them believe it, right? So that's what it means to persuade. You're working on their mindset. So the act of persuasion is the strategic use of communication. Is a strategic use of communication. When you're persuading, it's a strategic use of communication, but it's rooted in psychology because you're working on the mindset of your audience, right? It's rooted in psychology and empathy because you're working on the mindset. You're also trying to move or influence their emotions, you know. So it's rooted in psychology and empathy, and you're trying to influence, shift, or align others' action and attitudes with your own, right? You're selling your own idea to the person. So it focuses on building rapport, fostering trust and meeting the needs of others to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes rather than using coercion or intimidation. And that's what we call ethical persuasion. There's also the unethical persuasion, right? Which is not, then there's no beneficial outcome. You're just trying to move someone's position in a way that you want to steal from the person. You want to rob the person. So, but ethically speaking, the outcome is beneficial, right? It's not a one-sided end. So the art of persuasion. Persuasion fosters better communication and understanding in relationships. When it's done ethically, it brings a better communication. It helps you to be able to sell your point. You're right. Persuasion, if when you know the act of persuasion is the act of communication, right? You're trying to help someone see your point, right? So and understand your point, right? So it helps it fosters better communication and understanding in relationship. It helps to resolve conflicts calmly, build trust and influence. So persuasion is a powerful force in daily life and has a major influence in society as a whole. The golden rule of persuasion is if you want someone to do something for you, you have to ask them to do something, So that's the essence of persuasion. You don't assume in persuasion. If you want to shift someone's position, you have to do something to make that person shift position. It doesn't happen of its own accord, and we'll see more of that as we go deeper into it. But when it comes to communication, there are four ingredients to communication. It is the person well, when it comes to persuasion, is the person who is persuading or the communicator, is the message to be passed to result in the shift, and how that message is passed and the audience to which that message is passed. So those are four ingredients. And for you to succeed, you need to understand, these four ingredients and use them in the right combination to be able to get the outcome that you want, right? Is the persuader, the people to be persuaded, the message to be sold to them, and how that message is sold to them. Those are the four ingredients, to persuasion, and it also can be called the four ingredients to communication, because persuading is pretty much communication, right? It's another word for saying communication. You're passing a message to your audience, right? So when we talk about, just to differentiate between ethical and non-ethical persuasion, the essence of ethical persuasion is to have a conversation between two or more adults. It is mutual respect and not manipulation, right? So, but when it comes to a con game, it's not ethical persuasion. Ethical persuasion, it's trying to have a conversation with another adult. It's that place where God says, "Come and let us reason together." It is a reasoning together. It is helping you to reason, think along. But towards a preferred ultimate end, but there's no manipulation about it. There's a mutual respect that takes place. So ethical persuasion is defined as influencing others' beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors in a manner that is honest, keyword honest, it is respectful, and it is transparent. So you can imagine that unethical persuasion will be such as you're influencing others' beliefs, attitude, and behaviors in a manner that is not honest, is not respectful, and is not transparent, right? So when viewed as a conversation between two or more adults, it implies that both parties are treated as equals who have the autonomy to make informed decisions, right? So you you don't talk to an adult like a child, an ethical persuasion you talk to the adult like an adult. I've seen places in so-called churches, where the people at the pulpit are talking to the congregation as if they are children. They're talking down to them. That's not ethical, and that's not godly. That's a devilish way of communication or persuading or preaching or teaching. If you're not talking to someone else like an adult, then it's not ethical, right? And that's the basis, and God gives us that basis. Says, come and let us reason together. He treats us like adults, not children, right? So another core principle to ethical persuasion is respect for autonomy, right? Well, just that we just described it earlier on, but these are principles to ethical persuasion. It's you respect the autonomy of each person. You respect you give that person uh, the opportunity to say no. I mean, if someone is not allowed to say no, then it's yes, it's useless. Right. So if you're persuading the people you're talking to must have the liberty to be able to say no. Otherwise, their yes is useless. But in unethical persuasion, you're not expected to say no. No is not an option. Right. Yeah, they're just trying to force things down your throat. All right. So ethical persuasion respects the audience right to choose, right? As much as they're trying to push you in one direction, they respect your right to choose, your right to say no. And it's just the same way God would do what He says. Hey, I present before you life and death. I like you to choose life, but it's your choice. It doesn't force you to take the life. You have to choose, and bear the consequence of your choice. The other part to ethical persuasion is truthfulness and transparency, right? So it's truthful, it's transparent, like we said earlier on. So there's no you don't lie to the people. Well, the other aspects to ethical persuasion is there's a mutual benefit, right? It's not a win-lose, it's not a lose-win, it's a lose-lose, it's a win-win or no deal, right? And also there's authenticity, right? It's authentic communication, right? So looking at ethical versus unethical persuasion. Ethical, ethical persuasion provides evidence, it gives reason, and lets the person decide freely, right? It gives room to deciding freely. Unethical persuasion, manipulation, coerciveness uses threats, uses manipulations, uses emotional triggers, that lack evidentiary support to force compliance. And we see that also in churches, oh, they create fears. Oh, if you don't come to church, oh, angel will come and count. Oh, if you don't give your tithe, this will happen to you, that will happen to you. If you don't give offering, that's stupid, and that's not of God, that's of a devil. You don't try to persuade people by making them scared. right? You persuade people by telling them by just telling them what it is, and you don't have to add your own to it, right? Just give them the information and let them make their decision, not out of fear, but out of faith, and you don't have to add to the word of God just because you're trying to steal from people, So it's unethical, right? Also, ethical persuasion, doesn't involve manipulation or threats, or trickery, you know. Yep. So pretty much when it comes to uh ethical persuasion, it must be truthful, it must be authentic, it must be respectful, it must be equitable, and it must be socially responsible. If any of this is lacking, then there's something wrong about it.